little talk then is a little bit more about track day driving, and what we wanted to do really, rather than give everybody a kind of real in-depth technique-y kind of talk, which we can do, we just thought we would try and give people a few sort of quick wins that you can take away from the stuff that we do over the year, the kind of most common things that kind of come up. So that's the thinking behind what we're doing here tonight and some of the things that we're going to talk about. So it's more of a kind of some little pointers really of the common sort of pitfalls that people find themselves falling into. So let me see if we can get this going. So yeah, so find your place on a track day with myself and Kat, as I say, who will be along fairly shortly, but we'll get going as we are. So for those of you who don't know, Kat and I are have a grand title of driving consultants, but essentially we're driver coaches. So we work with manufacturers like Porsche, which is one of our main sort of sources of what we do, as well as lots of private customers and things like that. So our backgrounds are motorsport. We're both racing drivers, but we've both been coaching. I've been coaching since 1994. Kat's been coaching since about 2000. So we've been at it for quite a long time, and we're quite prolific. We've done a lot of it because we do a lot of work with Porsche. Those of you who've been to PEC and seen what PEC is all about, you know, we are there quite a lot of the time. Our private client base is growing a lot more, so we're doing a lot more privately, but it's what we do when there's no pandemic on. We are in a car pretty much every day on a circuit somewhere, so we sit with a lot of people. We do a lot of this kind of work, so we've seen most things. I can never say you've seen it all, but you've seen most things. So this is kind of a culmination of some of the kind of key points, as I say. So in terms of who we are, if you want to have a look at our websites, feel free. We've got three of them on the go at the moment, which is Velocity Driving, which is the main one, which will explain to you about some of our sort of normal courses, so our road courses and our track courses and things like that. We've got Velocity Driving Racing website, which is more of our where we work with young drivers and gentleman drivers to develop their specifically motor racing. And then we've got our simulator site. Again, feel free to go and have a little look at that. If you want any more information, feel free to email us or email Mandy at the club. She will pass anything on to us as well. So yeah, any more information about tonight or anything in general, then feel free to drop us a line. Everybody's different, so as I say, you can cover sort of a few key points, but everybody's problems, what everybody wants to get out of their racing is different. So you know, it's always worth having a chat. If you've got something specific in mind you want to achieve or you'd like to do, just give us a shout and have a chat on the phone. It's probably the best way of doing it, and we can come up with a plan from there. So Kat has joined now.
Yes, hello. Sorry to be slightly late. About 5 minutes.
So yeah, so there we go. So in terms of what we're going to talk about tonight then, so key things. So the first one's going to sound a little bit strange, which is slow down. We're then going to talk about the importance of exits, using vision, finding a reference, and then what brings it all together, certainly when you're away from the track, is then analysing what you're doing before and after. So they're the kind of sort of key things that we're going to talk about. So starting with slow down. So it sounds like a really strange thing to do when you're talking about driving on circuits, to slow down. I think it was Fangio who said that speed comes from slowing down. Essentially what we're talking about here, it's not so much driving the car more slowly, it's what you do as a driver in terms of how your inputs are with the car, I suppose, really. And one of the common things that we see is that people up their work rate as they go quicker. So they start to do more and more of the work themselves and try and force the car to do things as they go quicker. But of course, as the car starts to get towards the limit and it's working harder, you actually need to do less things. You need to do them more gently and more progressively. So it's not a matter of forcing the car to do things. It's finding a way of allowing the car to work. And slowing down what you're doing in terms of your inputs, dampening everything a little bit, can be quite a key part of that. One thing that we talk about a lot, Kat and I, is that we come across when we sit with people, is one of patience. So people sort of rushing what they're doing is quite a thing that we see a lot of.
Yeah, it's probably the most common mistake, if I'm honest, because naturally you think, right, I need to get a move on. So of course, what do? You start trying to come off the brakes earlier, brake less, accelerate more. All really common, and almost it makes sense, doesn't it, really, in many respects. But when you actually break it down and look at it in depth, you start to appreciate that rushing it actually can prolong the corner and make it much slower than you actually first anticipated. So the car might feel like it's on edge and it might feel like it's working very hard, but that's not necessarily a good thing. And that's what we're going to kind of look into with this.
Yes, absolutely. So I think when you're driving quickly, you want to drive quickly, and of course, it doesn't really work like that. Which is how the whole thing about speed comes from slowing down. That's where that comes from. What it also affects is the timing of what you're doing. And timing again is another kind of key thing. Timing and patience kind of go together, really, because what we mean by timing is just doing things at the right point for the car. So you've got to feel what the car's doing, and you've got to sort of appreciate where it is you're trying to get the car to go to. And quite often it won't be going where you want it to because your timing is wrong, because you've not been patient enough. So you can see how it still starts to compound. And it sounds like it's not really a technique. And I guess it isn't really. It's more of a kind of a philosophy and an attitude as much as anything else. But just trying to get yourself so that you're not rushing things is really quite important.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of the string theory. So how will we put this? So coming out of a corner and trying to imagine your right foot and your hands are working at exactly the same speed, exactly the same rate. So if you are straightening the wheel slowly, you want to be accelerating slowly. If you're straightening the wheel quickly, you want to be accelerating quickly. Now that sounds obvious, I appreciate, but of course your eyes are up ahead, you're feeling the car, you're wanting to push, and it is so easy to mistime that, and it doesn't need to be by much. That's the thing, we're not talking about massive amounts here. So you could be driving really well, but we still need to progress that and perfect that, and that's where this comes in. So you can have quite big gains on track days looking at quite small areas at times. So even if you really understand it well, it's something that can always be perfected, and you might not appreciate at times how impatient you're being coming out of it. Might be hairpins, whatever it might be. So yeah, it's certainly it's areas that sound simple, but that you can really keep perfecting.
Absolutely. A kind of follow on from that really is looking a little bit at smoothness. Now, smoothness is a bit of a funny one, really, because obviously I think most people that are sitting listening to this understand the importance of doing things smoothly. But quite often what we find as well is if somebody, they work quite hard at doing things smoothly, they end up then actually doing them a little bit too slowly. So the rate at which they're moving their bodies isn't quite right. So that's another difficult thing to get your head around. So while you're trying to do things patiently and you're trying to do them smoothly, you've also got to do them at the right rate. A good example of that, the thing that Kat was talking about then with the string theory, as you come out of a corner, of not taking too long to take the steering load off of the car. You can do things quite smoothly and still do them quickly, and that takes a bit of practice. But again, it's another thing that you can focus on. You can do this on the road. You don't need to be on a track day to do it. You can practice doing things smoothly and progressively, but speeding up the doing them, but not affecting the car, if that makes sense. You know, and again, there's a big gain to be had there.
Absolutely. I think it's something that certainly working with people, the most common thing is be smoother. But of course, there is a fine balance of being smooth, but also being positive and still trying to make that progression, I suppose. So it's a fine balance, but that's the thing, is you can actually straighten the steering wheel quickly, accelerate quickly, and brake quickly and firmly, and come off the brakes all actually a really smooth rate. And that's the thing, is you still might be positive, but everything is happening very smoothly. And okay, that might be something that at the moment you may need to go into us with more detail to feel really happy with the ins and outs of those details. But yeah, that's what you're aiming for, isn't it? Is to be as smooth as possible, but in a positive manner.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what all of this does, it helps to get you ahead of what's going on, really. So people being behind the action can be quite a common thing that we see, where the car's doing things and they're not expecting it. And car only does what you tell it. So it'll be doing something you've asked it to do, but it's whether you've understood that, and whether you're ahead of what the car's going to do next. So by slowing everything down a little bit and trying to create some time for yourself, it gets easier to get yourself ahead of the car. At least that's the that's the kind of theory, if you like. Yeah. So what we've got a couple of little films here, which are fairly entertaining, which are kind of all these things really in a nutshell, really. So you've got a couple of guys here who are doing all of these things. They're not being patient. They're not being particularly smooth, and they're a long way behind what the car's doing. So the first one is a chap in a BMW. So apologies if anybody recognises this boat. There's no names.
And there's not. This isn't to name and shame anyway. No. You know, we're all in this together, and we're all learning, right? You know, and we're all at different stages. So I don't want it to seem like we're being negative about somebody, because I've certainly made plenty of mistakes over my time.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure you have, Rich. But yes, it also we can learn from others, I suppose. So this is where this will come in, hopefully.
Yes. So the first one, as I say, is a guy in a BMW, and he does the classic thing. If he turns into a sharp corner and immediately, as I would describe it, does a wheelie, and then the car doesn't really know what's coming next. The next corner he then seems to forget about. But anyway, have a look at the film, and you'll kind of get the idea of what we're looking at. Here we go. So there you go. So you could see he was behind what was happening there a little bit. So obviously that's Alton Park. So the last corner there, Lodge, he kind of turned in, and he got away with that quite well, actually. He was a bit early on the throttle, and it just oversteered a bit of the exit. But when he got to the next corner, I'm not entirely sure what he was thinking or where he was looking, but you can see how easy it is to take your eye off the ball, because he's not driving slowly, and there's quite a bit of footage of him driving, and he's not a terrible driver.
No, not at all. If anything, he's probably quite confident, isn't he, really?
Yes.
And pushing, which isn't a bad thing at all. But only needs to be one thing out of that sequence. Now, it's hard to say, obviously, from this perspective, exactly what that is. We could guess and say, oh, it's vision, or, you know, just being eager, getting on the gas straight away, or not slowing it enough. But overall, yeah, I mean, from my personal perspective, it looks like vision. First of all, he looks like he's misread the corner completely, for the second one, certainly. And of course, most people think, right, I need to carry loads of speed in because that's the way to be fast. And that actually is logical, isn't it? But actually, if you think about it and you break it actually down, if that then prolongs the corner and you end up very, very wide, and you're then off the gas and nothing's really happening, and then you're on the gas much later and much more steadily, then you've prolonged the corner, made it much bigger, and therefore is much slower. So yeah, it's kind of breaking it down a little bit more, and this is where we can learn from each other and work out really what's happened there.
Absolutely. The next one is slightly more alarming, because it's difficult to sort of, he's just so far behind the car, this guy. And you'll see this is only a little MX-5, so it's only got about 30 horsepower, but even that, you managed to get that to overwhelm it. But anyway, there you go. Have a little look. So there you go. So clearly not a Porsche Club day.
Mind you, well, there's a Porsche in front.
Absolutely. Well, he's got past him. Yeah, he's got past him.
Yeah, you can see there, though, perhaps potentially, not a lot of thought going into it, but a lot of confidence. And it's a fine balance. You want to have confidence, but that knowledge at the same time. And like I said, everybody has to learn. But from certainly where I'm sat, it looks like he's trying to carry too much speed in, then lifting and turning very aggressively. So of course the back of the car is very light and it's wanting to swap ends. So but you could break that down massively and think, okay, so where's he looking in the first place? And start with that first of all. What's his understanding of how to get the quick gain? So is he thinking the entrance is where he needs to be attacking, when actually it's the exit, which we're going to look at very shortly? Yes, there's lots to look at there, but you have to learn from this. You know, and like I said, everybody has to start somewhere.
Absolutely. So you segued nicely in there to the next bit, which is if you wanted to give somebody one thing that was going to give them a real quick win when they're on a track day, it is to focus on the exit of the corner. If you talk to any professional racing driver and ask them what's the most important part of a corner, they will pretty much all tell you the exit. Some of them will argue it's the entry because that sets the exit up, but you know that's me being pedantic. But the guy with the MX-5 there essentially is barreling in with a load of speed. Of course, he's not getting an exit because he's on the grass and the car's out of control and everything else.
Which is almost a shame because it's obviously very brave and bold and happy to try and push the limits. So there's a lot of ingredients there that is a good thing for a racing driver, but it's learning how to channel it.
He's ballsy,
yeah learning how to channel it, I suppose. But yeah, importance of exits, and this is something that we discuss all the time with drivers, because the most common mistake, and I've done it and I've been there, is you think, right, let's carry loads of entry in. I've got to be quick, so I must push the entries. But of course, if it ruins the rest of the corner and then you're coming out massively wide on the exit and not really getting the power down, especially coming onto something like you look at this picture here, coming onto a straight, you can be losing massive amount of time, you know, rather than gaining what you need. So
absolutely, So this is Mulsanne Corner at Le Mans. So Le Mans is nearly 9 miles round, so there's an awful lot of straights. So if you can spend, if you can shorten how long you're spending going down straight, you know, by going down them more quickly, you're going to have a lap time gain. So the aim of concentrating on your exits, as much as anything, is to shorten the corners so that you lengthen the straight. So what I mean by that is a car's always happy when it's in a straight line. They're the fast bits of the racetrack. So the more time you can spend in a straight line, not going around a corner, the better. So if you come in a little bit too quickly, and like we were saying before about the patience and the timing and everything else, where that tends to cost you time a lot is because it makes the corners go on for too long. Where if you concentrate on getting a good exit, what you'll do is you'll spend less time going around the corner and you'll spend more time blasting down the straight. It's almost like a drag race between the corners. So that's why the exits are so important. Because if you imagine now this straight here, so you come out of the Mulsanne corner, and the next thing you know, if you're in a P1 car, a 919 or something, you're now going to do 200 miles an hour for about the next 2 minutes. It's a very, very long way to the next braking point. It's about 2.5 miles. So if you can get a better exit from this corner, you're going to save yourself a huge amount of time. But you're not really going to save that amount of time if you carry more speed into the corner. You know, it's the gains are not there. So you kind of compromise a little bit on the way in. You set yourself up to get yourself a good exit.
And that's exactly it, isn't it? And we'll look at this later, where you make sacrifices, because there's always a trade-off, right? It is, unfortunately, there always is. So you do have to look at where's your biggest wins, where's your biggest gains. And we're going to look at that a bit later with an overall map and going through kind of, okay, what do you guys think? Where you're going to sacrifice and where you're going to gain. So we'll go into that more.
So so make the exit your priority and set yourself up for the exit. So we thought about spending a bit of time talking about braking, but we think that's probably a little bit more advanced, and it's more difficult to do. It's not a quick win working on your braking. This is more about things that you could take away and you could do tomorrow. It's harder to do that with braking. So essentially, if you think of slow in, fast out, that's essentially what you're trying to do. You're trying to set yourself up to get yourself a good exit, if that makes any kind of sense at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we have a little film we'll explain more about this, who this chap is, in a second. But what we wanted to show you was how cleanly he gets his 2 exits. So this is Donington on the full circuit. It's just the loop.
Yeah. So just to have a look at, actually, I suppose this is perhaps a harsh comparison in some respects. This is a very experienced driver, but just watch everything he does. So from, how he sets the car up on the entry, where he's apexing, how he's straightening out the exits, the way he's feeding the power in. Just try and take in as much as you possibly can. It's only a short clip, but as best you can.
Yeah. So you can see there, you're coming out of the second one. He's not even using as much road as the guy in front, but he got such a clean exit. You just drive straight past him. And they're all the same. This was a British GT test session, so that was a GT3 car that he just passed. Obviously, we're in a 997 GT3R here, but you can see lovely, clean exits. No wasted time, no wasted energy.
But what you will notice is it looks easy, so it's not frantic. And I know when I was learning, I assumed being on the limit meant frantic. Like everything had to look so on the edge. Now, of course, it depends what you drive. I do think older cars, there's so little grip, it's going to be on the edge much earlier. But yeah, I do think with a more modern vehicle like this, with a lot of mechanical grip, it needs to look that clean. It needs to look that tidy, where it's very simple. Right, let's make the corner short, get it in, get a straight exit, get clean power down. Now, of course, that's easier said than done in any of these situations. But of course, somebody of we said who he is.
Not yet. No,
okay, sorry. Okay. Oh, shut up.
Yeah, well, no, it's not for any reason. It's just I'll save that little surprise.
Okay,
yeah.
Sure.
So that leads us on to the next bit, really, of how you start to. We've talked about patience and time and all that kind of stuff, but essentially what we're trying to do, and I touched on it earlier on, is create some time for yourself, because the earlier you pick up on things and the earlier you start to plan and deal with things, the easier it becomes. So all of a sudden, speed starts to become a byproduct then of good technique and good planning and putting yourself in the right places and looking in the right places, so that it doesn't feel that quick. So the one key thing, and this is because we've got a helmet cam here, you can kind of see where the driver's moving his head to a degree. So that's quite useful. But what we're coming to essentially is how you use your vision, and this is a very, very key thing. And we spend a lot of time talking about this. So the picture there is Kimi Räikkönen at Monaco, but you can see the front wheels are straight, but his head's turned. So he can't see round that corner, but he will be looking at a point beyond where he can see. It's not because he needs to see that particularly, it's just that he's telling his brain what's going to come next, so that he gets ahead of it.
It's very and we'll go into this, but subconscious, isn't it? It's like learning anything, an instrument or anything. It gets to a point where you only need small detail and the body will do the rest, won't it? Now, it takes a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
But right from the start, that needs to be happening. And like Rich says here, you can't see a huge amount, but he's seeing enough to give him more information, right?
Yes, absolutely. Bearing in mind how quickly he'll be going at this point. So what he's doing, he's creating time, because he's getting himself a long way ahead of the game. So he's looking a long way down the road. This takes a lot of practice, because as you go quicker, especially when you start to learn new things or you start to push things a little bit, your vision will drop. And it takes a lot to get your head to lift and look further down the road. But it really, really pays dividends, because it suddenly gets a lot easier once you've trained yourself to do it. Because as we keep harping on about, you're getting in front of what's going on. Things start to slow down. That's quite key. As Kat was alluding to then, is then how your brain and how your body works. So your hands will follow your eyes. So driving is very much a subconscious act. You don't have to think about how you make the car go around the corner. So if you find reliable ways of making your subconscious work for you, it doesn't half work well. So what Kimi Räikkönen will be doing here, he'll be looking at where he wants to put the car. His neurological pathways will do the rest of the work, as it would with any of the rest of us. Okay, we're not all driving Formula 1 cars around Monaco, but the principles are absolutely the same. If you can get your subconscious to do the work for you, it makes life a lot easier. And it all falls again back into the same thing of just slowing things down, creating time for yourself.
And it is doing that, isn't it, from a young age, or as early as possible. When I say young age, you know, from whenever you start. It doesn't mean, oh, well, the F1 drivers do that, but I'm not going to do that yet. You need to do that immediately. That's part and parcel of the makeup of what you're doing ultimately. So yeah, I mean, I go on, don't I, all the time. I think probably every podcast I've done or webinar like this, I've gone on about vision being the backbone of everything we do. But it really honestly is, and it sounds so simple, but because it's so subconscious, actually, it's very easy to not appreciate where you're actually looking. So it's really important at times, however much experience you've got, to ask yourself, where am I looking? Just now and then, and actually really assess it. Am I looking really where I should be, or am I using all the vision available, or am I just looking right in front of me? And really, we'll go into it more in a bit anyway, but ultimately you need to be scanning all the time, getting as much info as early as possible.
Absolutely. So you said there, Mark, eyes on main beam. That's a good way of putting it, really, but you've also got to bring your eyes back.
Yeah, so it's constant scanning, because one common mistake is when we start talking about looking ahead, and I've had this a lot with drivers, is they feel this pressure to only look ahead. And it's like, well, actually, in fairness, as much as you might try and look into the distance all the time and use your peripheral vision in between, you still need to drop your eyes. You still need to look back towards where you're aiming the car, you know, so entries, mid, exit, and beyond. So it's just scanning all the time, and it sounds simple, but actually it's very hard to be consistent at.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, guys, if you have any questions, just type them in.
Please do. It's an interactive session, so you know, anything, go for it, and we'll answer as much as we can as we go along. So no biggie there.
So little picture here. So on board with a Ferrari GT3 car here. A bit of a Ferrari theme to this bit. So what we're looking at here, you can see obviously the two dots. The red dot is quite often where people will drop their vision to. Like the guy in the BMW, that's probably where he was looking, was just in front of the car. Now, obviously, the green dot is where you should be looking. So right the way down the road towards where the apex is. So what you'd find is if you did that, you'd probably find your judgment of your braking would be a lot more accurate than if you tried to do it by looking immediately in front of the car. So just by looking where you want the car to be, and as you approach the apex, what you do then is lift your eyes and flick your eyes further through the corner, so that your subconscious is then moving on to the next part of the process, if you like. So you're getting yourself ahead of that little bit of what's coming next, slowing things down, getting things ahead of yourself. So the film that we showed you with the guy in the 911, obviously that was a helmet cam and it was moving around a little bit. So what we thought we'd do, I found this bit of film a couple of years ago, and a few Formula 1 drivers tried some, they were basically glasses that they put on, but they were cameras. So they found them a bit awkward, but it worked quite well. So we found a bit of film of, I think it's Pierre Gasly doing an installation lap around Monaco, and he's wearing glasses, which he didn't like because he found them uncomfortable. But it's kind of the next level. So you see exactly what he looks at.
Yeah. And one thing I will say is he's not going quickly. But what is interesting, even at steady speed, how far ahead he's looking.
Yes.
You know,
and how early his head turns before the car does.
Yeah. And the faster you get, obviously, the more important that becomes. So the more he'll exaggerate that. So yeah, just take it in. I wouldn't say it's super exciting, but take it in.
It's
and
quite a cool bit of film. But yeah. Anyway, have a little look.
Turn one. Turn one, good. now we're clear. Box, Pierre, box.
So we gather that didn't work for everybody, but
Yeah.
we'll see if we can get.
That's a bit of a shame, isn't it? Because the other ones have worked all right.
Yeah, typical. There you go.
Yeah, okay. So hopefully it gives you a little bit of an idea. I appreciate that didn't go quite to plan. That's the problem with the videos. You test them, it seems fine, and then yeah, then it does it in little freeze pictures, doesn't it?
Yes. Let me just see what my settings are up here. If I've got.
Well, it was working before, and the others have, so I won't worry.
Yeah, I just wonder if it was.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. No, I think it's probably just that video. I won't worry. Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, there we go. So yes, on to the next bit then. So
hopefully it gives you an idea though, even if you saw just him, even his helmet tilting very far left before the left-hander, you know, or even just a steady lap doing a radio check and just warming the car up. And of course, the faster you go, the more important that becomes, and the earlier you need to look. And it just really highlights all of that ultimately. And it doesn't matter what you're driving, just because he's in an F1 car, it doesn't mean anything. It's so important to really keep using that vision as best as possible. And I know we go on about it a lot and it sounds so simple, but it's actually something that most people when we're teaching think they're doing better than they are, because it's so subconscious.
Yes.
That's where that comes in, and it's great but can also get in the way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So on to the next bit then, is again another good one for quick wins on track days, is to find yourself some good reference points. Quite often, like Kat was saying before, you say to somebody, so what are you looking at, or what are you looking for? People quite often don't have an answer. So by finding yourself some reference points, that first of all, it takes care of that because it gives you something to look for. But then that other things start to fall into place then, and it does the same thing we were saying before about it creates time, because you get yourself ahead of the action. Like you can see this little picture here where you've got a 50-yard marker. Now we're pretty close to the corner in this picture here. But you can see how you're heading down the straight, you think, right, well, I know I can brake at the 50-yard marker and the car's going to stop nicely. So then all of a sudden that becomes something you don't have to worry about too much, because what it does, it creates time, it creates consistency, because you can keep repeating it. And it does the same thing before of getting you ahead of what's coming on. It helps with your vision, because as I say, from back down on the straight, you can see where you're trying to get the car, what you're going to do next, what your next reference point's going to be. And it helps then to break down the technique. So in other words, you can start to think, right, I need to brake at this point. Now I can start to look at my next, so I've got that bit, I can now start to look at my next reference point. So then you've turned the car in, you then start to look for your exit reference point, and so on and so forth. So the circuit starts to break down into little bits. So then you can start to piece it together. And as you get to know the circuit and you get familiar with it, your reference points and things will change, but it doesn't half make life easier. You think if you go to a racing school, for example, and quite often they do it on track days, is they put the marker cones out. And all they are is just very obvious reference points.
Which I think I think reference points are very good, aren't they, for specifics? But one thing I would be careful of with reference points is you go to one circuit and you learn where to brake at that specific point for those conditions. So, so in other words, reference points move, don't they, all the time?
Yes.
So one thing I would say is they're brilliant, especially if your vision is poor or it's a corner you particularly struggle with and you need that consistency. But just bear in mind that conditions change, so reference points change. So like as best as possible, we'll teach people without reference points and then add those in at the end. So I know that's very different to what most people would do initially, is actually let's join the dots and, you know, you brake here, turn here, accelerate there. But actually that's not really teaching you. It might help you for that immediate moment, but actually in the long term, it's not teaching you for other circuits or different conditions. So reference points are brilliant in context, aren't they?
That's right. So they're good for piecing things together. So, you know, like we were saying before about the consistency. So you think, okay, well, I need to make sure I get that apex there or whatever it is. But exactly right, they do move around. And of course, if you're offline because you've done an overtake or somebody's overtaking you, then you've got to apply them with a little bit of common sense. But they can really help you to sort of develop what you're doing a little bit. In terms of some of the reference points you can use, obviously you've got the marker board there. Hang on. There we go. So we've got a picture of a couple of corners here at Barcelona. So a good one that kind of people don't really know is there, but it's obvious and you'll see it everywhere you go, is where the rubber marks are. So for here, you can see a dark black line, which is the line that cars will use coming into that corner. Now, lines always look really odd when you're stood at the side of the road. You think, well, that doesn't look right. But when you're in the car, it makes perfect sense. But also, if you look further round the corner, you'll see where the rubber is on the curb. So that is a really, really good reference point. So once you've got that, you can then look across to the next curb. So you're getting ahead with your vision as to where the next bit of rubber is. And you know then, so as we were saying before about how it can be a really useful guide, that's where you know you're going to try and get the car. So as you're coming into the corner, you're looking at that rubbered in bit and think, okay, right, if I just kiss that, that's going to be about right. Same with the next one, but you'll naturally set the car up to take the right line to clip that next little bit. So you can see how it all starts to piece the corners together for you. But then if you look at the exit of the second one, you'll see like an orange mark on the wall. So quite often when you talk to racing drivers, what they'll do is they'll look up for things like that, which are off the road. But what it does, it lines the car up with the next bit. So lots of little bits of reference points that you can use. And quite often if you talk to locals, so local instructors or people that know the circuit well, you'll be amazed what little bits of detail they've got that they can tell you about. A good one is at Alton, which is my home track. As you come up Clay Hill, up under the bridge, if any of you know Alton, Jackie Stewart years and years ago said if you set the car up so that it's in line with the biggest tree you can see, it brings you over the hill on the right line. But the trick then is to then stop looking at the tree because it's about 200 yards off the edge of the road. But it just gives you a good guide as you go up the hill to look at the big tree and it pops you over the top.
Mind you, have they not cut that tree down?
No, that tree's still there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I know that they have
they've
cut
cut
a
most
lot
of
of
the
trees.
trees,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was going to say, I know they have.
Well, they've left that one.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, sorry guys if that video didn't work. I mean, unfortunately, we've tested it, we've run it, and it's worked our end. God knows why. Unfortunately, we're not very IT savvy, so I don't know why the other one's worked and it hasn't. But obviously, any questions, even after this, if you're still not sure and you think I didn't get that, just send us a message and we'll get back to you and give you some guidance on it. So hopefully, no big deal there.
So the reason I put this picture back in, this one with the Ferrari, this is a pretty good reference point on the left there. But the same thing about when we were looking ahead, what you would find is if you were looking down towards the apex there where the green dot is, then you'll find that your peripheral vision then will pick up on the reference point there. So that's quite a useful thing to do once you've got a reference point programmed in, again, letting your subconscious do the work. Same kind of thing. So we're going to tempt fate because we've got another video. Now the videos, some of them, so the next one we're going to show you is the same guy as before at Donington. And it is Nick Tandy. So the reason we thought I'll keep that quiet is because obviously he's not a track day driver. He's one of the best racing drivers on the planet. But it's really good to see somebody like him work. Now it goes a little bit in and out of focus because it's a helmet cam. So it's not got a fixed focus. It tries to focus on whatever, is the most logical thing to do. So it does go in and out a little bit. But what we wanted to, reason we thought we'd throw this little bit of film in is because it's everything that we've kind of talked about so far. He's very, very patient with the car, which you have to be a little bit with 911s. Otherwise they tend to understeer if you're too early with the throttle. But he's really patient with the car. He's very consistent in what he does. So he hits every mark. You'll see he never misses an apex. He never misses an exit point. Everything is exactly where he wants it to be, but also he concentrates very much on shortening the corners and getting good exits. So it's quite a nice little film. It's just one lap of Donington. Fingers crossed it plays.
Yeah.
Go on.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say that I do think with the videos, unfortunately, it does depend a little bit on speeds, doesn't it? Because you know, it's working this end, isn't it? But it's not working for everybody.
Yeah,
so I think it's
no.
just yeah,
So
sorry, can't alter it.
Is turning point more important than braking? Because I was thinking, well, I wouldn't say it was more important because your turning point can alter a little bit as well. You tend to find that braking is normally the last thing that you would work on, because the gains you get from braking in exactly the right point are quite small generally. So you can actually work on getting a better lap time normally earlier by actually doing a slightly longer, lighter brake, because you can judge your entry speed that little bit better. And if you get your entry speed sorted out so that you get just the right amount of speed in without compromising your exit, that'll gain you more time than negging your brake point. So it's not about whether the turn point is more important. I can see where you're going with that, really. It's still about the exit, so that will dictate where you turn pretty much, if that makes sense. Let's try this film anyway. So we'll just let you watch this and hopefully it'll work. Yeah, no, absolutely, because it's about getting the car set up for the exit. But you see how much he shortens the corner, so he carries that brake right the way in and continues to tighten his line.
Absolutely.
And then gets rid of it on the way out.
Absolutely. So to Jason, absolutely. And that kind of proves the point, doesn't it? That it's not necessarily about the entry, it's about the exit. And we get it a lot where actually, genuinely, a lot of the time with clients, they think, oh, I'm sure you're getting me to brake early, or you're braking earlier than I am, or softer than I am. But it is thinking about, obviously every car is different, every corner is different, but trying to carry momentum, but shorten the corner and get a straight exit. So however you achieve that, that's what you're trying to do, really.
So last coach Silverstone GP talked about so getting the car to rotate depends on the corner a little bit, but that's essentially what Nick's doing there. Is he's letting the car, when you say rotate, essentially getting it to turn to point where you want it to go next before you pick the throttle up. Because what tends to happen is when you pick the throttle up, the car, wherever it's pointing at that time, when you touch the throttle, it'll want to then go in that direction. So if you're a little bit early, it will then stop rotating and it'll start to then disappear off the way, not where you wanted it to. So if you just wait, if you're a little bit more, comes back to the being patient thing, a little bit more patient until the car's pointing more where you want it to go, you'll get a better exit.
Yeah, and Colin has said about advocating trail braking into corners wherever possible. Yeah, honestly, yeah, I think pretty much all corners I'll trail brake. There may be the odd one where it's unbelievably fast, where actually it's almost a dab of the brakes just to settle it and scrub enough speed. And you want a very neutral car on the entry, so that, in other words, it's quite a shallow bend, so the front's not working that hard. Then yeah, it's less of a trail brake, but I would never just leap off the brakes. So in some respects, there's always some form of trail brake, isn't there? If you're hitting the brakes, yeah. It's just how much would depend on the corner, and that would depend on the tightness of the bend. So if you think of a hairpin, well, that's when you'll trail brake most. That's when the front end is working incredibly hard. But for more, shallow kinks, that's where it starts to alter. And you're still coming off the brake slowly, but not for as long, let's say.
Yeah. So trail braking, sorry, Jamie, trail braking is essentially it's carrying in a much reduced braking pressure into the first part of the corner. So there's an overlap between the braking and the cornering, but you're not hard on the brake. You've still slowed the car down 90% of it in a straight line. You've pretty much rolled the brake off, but not completely. You just keep a little bit of brake on just to keep some weight over the front wheels to help it change direction.
And it does confuse people, because if you go on to a red letter day, most of the time, and I work with loads of guys that have been instructing on this, and we've done it too, right? Where it's you're braking and off the brake and into the corner, because they're teaching with the very basics, but it's not for long before you really need to be able to trail brake, because otherwise you're not really setting the car up for the bend. You're not using the weight, and you can't really get the most out of the car. You're slowing the car, but you can't set it up, and that's where trail braking comes in.
Yeah. So getting on the power early on the exit is often said to be important for the following straight, but can be too early. Absolutely right. Absolutely. So that's what we were talking about before then, when somebody touched on about letting the car rotate. So if you've not got the car to rotate, so it's not turned in effect as much as you want it to when you pick the power up, that will push the nose wide. So if you want to get the power on earlier, you've got to turn more. That's where the compromise comes in. So you'd have to take a little bit more speed off, so you can take a slightly tighter line so that you can open the steering out earlier and therefore get the power on. Because you can only get the power on as you open the steering out, whether you're in a Nissan Micra or a Red Bull. It's exactly the same, because the principles will be, as soon as you pick the throttle up, you'll take grip off the front wheels, and it will start to go in the direction it's pointing at that time. So if you've not got your timing right, you'll start to understeer off the road. In a 911, that's really pronounced. And quite often with 911s, the classic 911 of it wagging its tail and disappearing off through the bushes starts at that point. So power on too early gives you, as somebody said, they understeer like cross-channel ferries. And it was a works driver who said that to me. So what they do is they grip like crazy at the back, push the nose wide, and of course immediately then, if you then take your foot off the throttle, you will bounce it and it starts to wag the tail. So it's all back to the same thing of being patient and waiting until the car is pointed where you want it to go before you go near the throttle. So if you want to get the power on earlier, you need to alter that bit, if that makes sense. Which takes us on nicely to the next bit, really, which is the final little bit about analysing what you're doing.
Which sounds easy.
It sounds easy, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And we'll explain a little bit as we go through this little bit. But essentially, what we're trying to get people to do is just think a little bit about what they're doing. So rather than going out and doing half an hour, 40 minutes pounding round, it's just being a little bit more analytical about what you're doing, about how you're sort of driving the car, what's working, what isn't, what you're happy with, what you're not happy with. So you're thinking about what you're doing. You're also feeling what the car's doing. So all this stuff that we're talking now about picking up the throttle early and all that kind of stuff, a lot of that has to do with feel. So if the car doesn't feel happy, it will tell you when it's ready for the throttle. So sorry to read this question. So would you actually lift slightly in the corner? It depends on the car a little bit, really. If you've got,
I would agree with that. It just depends, absolutely. Sorry, you were just about to say, but it does depend. So the faster the corner, the less you'll do that. But if it was a hairpin or something like that, and you really need the nose to react quickly and get that straighter exit, absolutely. So yeah, you can lift slightly to cause the weight to move forwards and of course the front to bite and rotate the car. But anywhere where it is faster, you have to be very, very careful how you do that. So most of the time it's the slower, more technical, tighter, twisty bits, isn't it?
Yes. So you're just trying to get the front to work more than anything else, trying to get the front to turn. But like you say, if you're in if you're in a quick corner and you lift to try and get it to tighten its nose, just be aware of what it is you're asking the car to do, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, good question.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so so be honest with yourself, which again is another thing people talk themselves into things, but actually be honest. It's not, it's your driving, so you think to yourself, actually, I'm not happy with that bit, and I could do with some help. Then absolutely go and get it. And one key thing that I always try and encourage people to do is to make notes. So anybody we work with, I always try and write a report so that they've got notes that we've made that help them to remember what they did on the day.
But not even necessarily just us either. So depending how you work, but also as the driver, I think it's very important, if you can, to jot down your own notes at the end of the day from the track, what you found good, what you found bad, what alterations you made, what worked, what didn't, because honestly you learn so much from that for that immediate moment, and also for next time. It does make a difference, I think, for everybody.
Yes. So advice on having confidence to turn off PSM. Well, the way that Porsche set their cars now, depends how old your car is really, is the PSM is designed now so that you can put it into sport mode and leave it on. The problem with PSM when it's in road mode is it can get your brakes hot because it's using the brakes to manage things. So there is now a sport setting where you can back the PSM off a little bit. But in all honesty, you can drive very, very quickly with PSM on.
Absolutely. I think honestly, unless you are looking almost for the final 10th or less than that, I think the systems are that good these days that if you are driving really well, super smoothly, but in a very positive, quick manner, then actually you shouldn't find PSM really intervening, really, should you, all that much? I think it depends on the age of the car. I appreciate that, but for a more modern one especially, so yeah, I think it depends. Yes, I'm not going to lie, that ultimate pace, that final 10th in anything, PSM off. But I do think you need to be very experienced to be able to appreciate that.
I'd never get anybody to turn it off.
Yeah.
And I know I can, because what we've been doing at PEC recently is we've been leading people around. So I did a day when we were out on Silverstone National Circuit with a guy who was very quick, and neither of us took the PSM off, and we were going pretty quickly. No, actually, if you don't have it, then that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, somebody said they don't even have ABS. Well, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you've got it, I would leave it on, because the limits of a modern one are massively high. So once you've turned the PSM off, if it starts to break away, you're going to be going a lot more quickly. Older cars, you've got to understand what they're doing. So if you get an early 911, for example, they really will, they get quite bad understeer. So what you have to do to drive an old 911 properly is you have to let it start to come round on you before you pick the throttle up, and that takes a lot of practice.
Because it's frustrating almost, isn't it? Because you feel like I need to be on the
power. It's great once you work it out,
power.
but you need to know what you're doing with it. So if I've driven a few sort of early 2-litre cars, and you've got to let them start to really almost start to spin, and then you pick the throttle up and they stabilise. But if you don't pick the throttle at the wrong point, then obviously you get a tank slapper on and you're going off up the grass.
And again, it all takes experience.
That's what 911s are all about.
And they're all different, and that's the thing is, unfortunately, it's not as black and white as you'd like. Get tuition and think, right, I know this now, that's how to do it. But it does depend completely what you're in, even the conditions, the track. But it gives you a good grounding, I think, and then you can experiment with that within reason. But yeah, turning things off, I think you have to be very careful and aware of what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve off the back of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth, if you've got an older car, thinking of doing some car control kind of courses and things.
Absolutely.
Learning a little bit about again, same thing, getting yourself ahead of it. If you start to know what the car's going to do before it does it, makes life a lot easier. you know, and how your inputs are affecting things, you know, so by when you lift off, what's happening and why and what's it going to do next. And
yeah, I think it allows you to purposely do things wrong, so you can accelerate far too hard into the corner, understand and recognize what's happening, how that actually felt, because that's the thing, is the car's constantly talking to you, but unless somebody's gone through with what it's telling you, it is another language. So yeah, you need that, and that's where I do think the car control development stuff helps you, whatever you do, whether it's on the road, track, whatever your ambitions are, it will still massively help.
so yeah. So going back to the analysis thing then, so just a couple of things that we tend to do. The first thing is we always take a map. I'm sure plenty of you do this, but maps are really useful. So obviously got Silverstone GP circuit here. So just looking at the areas that you're not happy with, so you can look at what shape they are.
But I'd love to ask a question. Can we ask a question?
Yeah.
So what corners would be the priority around this track? So like if you had to prioritize, what do you guys reckon? Like which would be the essential ones to get, like, I don't know, a really good exit out of?
The one before the longest straights.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then
Chapel.
here we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovefield, yeah, Chapel, absolutely, yeah. So anything, and it sounds simple, doesn't it? But yeah, absolutely. So even when there's a sequence of corners, when you've got Maggots, Beckett's, Chapel, you know, it's thinking about where you're going to gain the biggest, or well, save, I suppose, rather than gain, save the most. And it really is the straights. So it's so easy again to focus on trying to barrel in and carry loads of speed in, but actually it's all about those exits as well. So
so what we thought we'd do, just to finish off with, just a couple of ideas of things that other people do. So these are, so again, where track maps are useful. So these are professional drivers' notes. So you can see here we've got Snetterton, so you can see how where he's marked. He's got his own little code of where he's understeering, on oversteering, where he's happy with the car, where he isn't. We've got one from Mario Andretti. So obviously he's still making notes, and one from Bike Racer. You can see how much detail he's put on there, and they'll probably go away and write that up. But I've seen quite a few of these over the years where drivers sit down and they really go through what they've done and you know what key parts of the corner are. They then get notebooks and they write down what changes they made to the car, all kinds of stuff really. But any information you can get, it makes you think, it makes you analyze what you're doing, and that's the key thing. Is that just that analysis of what you're doing, what the car's doing, how you're affecting it, so that you're learning and developing, and you can go back and refresh your memory before you go on your next day. So there you go. So hopefully there was some useful information in there. As I say, any questions, then obviously feel free to drop us a line direct, or drop Mandy a line at the club. She'll forward anything on to us. That's what's this say. Well, if you drop us a line, drop us a line easier, and then we can give you a fuller answer.
Absolutely, but yeah, basically yes. In the short, yeah, Colin. So, but yeah, just give us a shout, and we'll go through it in more detail. But yeah, absolutely. And the case for any of you guys, and you know, even if it's just a little question, and that's it, you know, feel free to ask, please. You know, no big deal, whatever it is. You know, because these things, it's just looking in this situation, anything that can help, you know, give you something to focus on and enjoy. But yeah, please feel free, send us a message and we'll go through it in more detail. No big deal. But yeah, hopefully you all enjoyed that. Thank you so much, guys, for listening.
Stay safe.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm going to try and get out of here now.
Thanks.